we are here in the town of Greenville, Tennessee for the burial site of the 17th President of the United States, Andrew Johnson. Now, he's buried right up here on top of this mountain. This is the Andrew Johnson National Cemetery. The significance of this burial site is Johnson actually owned this land, and he owned the part of this hill, and that's where he decided to be buried when he died. So Johnson served as president right after the Civil War. He was president from 1865 to 1869, taking over after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Johnson was born in Raleigh, North Carolina on December 29th, 1808. And he grew up very poor, and he was pretty much illiterate. And his wife taught him how to read and write. He didn't know how to read and write his entire childhood, and somehow became president of the United States. It's a pretty big accomplishment. He moved to Tennessee in 1826, engaging in local and state level politics. He was elected governor of Tennessee in the 1850s and served one term as a Democrat. He was actually a Republican president, but he had Democratic sympathies and prompted Abraham Lincoln to choose Andrew Johnson as his running mate in the 1864 election. And so they won on the National Union ticket, as Johnson was the only Confederate governor who stayed loyal to the Union, because Tennessee was one of those states where you had certain areas of it, the Greenville area included, that were more pro-Union, whereas the whole state was a Confederate state. And he was appointed in 1862 by President Lincoln himself to be military governor of Tennessee. So, and then he won on the National Union ticket. However, only vice president for a month, because in April of 1865, Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater and Johnson assumed the presidency. So this doesn't have anything to do with Johnson, but it says "To our World War dead," May 30th, 1936. So this was actually dedicated before World War II, because World War I was just called the World War. So our World War dead. That's actually pretty interesting that that's there. I thought that was interesting. So this is where Johnson lived for most of his adult life here in Greenville, Tennessee. A relatively small town way out here in the Appalachian Mountains. So like I said, when Abraham Lincoln chose Johnson to be vice presidential candidate in 1864, it was an interesting time in American history, because the Civil War was still going on, and he needed unity. So Johnson was effectively a Democrat who took the role of a Republican to be on the ticket. But he had Democratic sympathies. Expected him to become president, because no one knew Lincoln was going to get assassinated. Lincoln was he was the first president to ever be assassinated. Before that, no president had ever been assassinated. So a month in, Johnson, who had only been vice president for, like I said, a month, takes office. So Johnson has a really hard time getting anything done with Congress, as Congress was full of, and his entire administration, the radical Republicans, because Johnson didn't agree with pretty much anything that anyone else did. So anything he tried to get done never worked. Johnson was famous for having started Reconstruction. Now, I'm not going to talk, it's not my place to talk smack about somebody in front of their gravestone, but he did have a lasting impact, whether that be positive or negative. I'll let you decide that on the country for the next century, because right after the Civil War ended, Johnson was in favor of emancipating slaves, just like a lot of people were. But you got to realize, at the time, he supported the emancipation, but he never really saw the idea of giving blacks citizenship in the United States. And so during Reconstruction, he made it a big effort to bring the states back in, bringing back their representatives to the federal government, and brought back all of the 11 seceded states to the Union. But at the same time, you had a weird thing going on where the southern states, who had had slaves for centuries up to that point, they didn't know what to do with the slaves, because they'd worked on plantations their whole life. And so a lot of them ended up going back to their old masters to work for them. And the amendment was passed, the 14th Amendment, to give blacks the right to vote. However, elections and the voting process is issued by the state. The laws are made by the state, and a lot of them passed what are known as Jim Crow laws, which banned blacks from voting in certain areas, also segregated their schools, restaurants, things like that. So that lasted for a century during Johnson's Reconstruction policies. And a lot of that happened. But what Johnson doesn't get credit for, and I think one of his biggest accomplishments during his presidency, was the purchasing. He oversaw the purchase of Alaska from the Russians in 1867. And there was also a controversy during his presidency in 1868 with the Tenure of Office Act, which was kind of a scandalous, corrupt act where he was trying to basically fire Secretary of War Edwin Stanton and members of his administration without Senate approval. And he was actually impeached for it, but he was acquitted by one vote. It did go through in the House, but not the Senate. So he was acquitted by one vote. That's the closest a president's ever come to being removed from office. And he was also the first president to be impeached. Johnson left office in 1869, not seeking a second term, and then he died 6 years later in July of 1875, and he was laid to rest right here in the Andrew Johnson National Cemetery, which was at the time known as this hill. I forgot what it's called, like Signal Hill or something, that he owned. So, but yes, he did a great job at bringing the states back to the Union after the Confederacy. Whether or not you think Reconstruction, because I would argue Reconstruction was almost as bad as the war itself, but the purchasing of Alaska was a big deal. So this grave's made entirely out of marble, I can tell, and it looks awesome. It's a really nice stone, because this is probably mostly original that has just been restored. It says Constitution of the United States. Oh, another thing about him, he is actually buried. Andrew Johnson, I believe, is buried wrapped in the American flag, and I think he's the only president that is wrapped in the American flag, and he's buried. That fact just came back to me. Johnson, I guess in his casket, he's buried with a copy of the Constitution wrapped in the American flag. His body's wrapped in the American flag. Andrew Johnson for smash! But yeah, all of this marble I think is original, and it's all been restored, because that was a very common practice back in the time that he died in the 1870s. Most people had marble stones, and a lot of them have not fared well to this day, but they've restored this, and it looks really nice. I like the eagle at the top too. That's cool. So with that, it's going to conclude the burial site of President Andrew Johnson, who screamed his name for smash. So let me know what you guys think about that, and we'll see you guys next time. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe. Goodbye. Wah!